Picture it, an armored knight swaying atop a weary horse, iron boots crunching on muddy roads, serfs bent double in endless fields, tied not just to the land, but to the will of their lord. Monks cloistered behind stone walls, whispering prayers while incense curls toward vaulted ceilings. Castles bristling with battlements, Gothic cathedrals clawing at the sky, and farms stretching endlessly toward the horizon. It is an image burned into our collective imagination, the medieval age as we think we know it, familiar, heavy, and unmistakable. Yet beneath this well-worn picture lies a far stranger truth, because the medieval age, quite simply, did not exist in the way we imagined it did, at least not to the people who supposedly lived through it. And understanding what it really was requires a journey not just into the past, but into the minds of those who later tried to define it. The phrase medieval age is itself a historical illusion, an anachronism, a label applied long after the fact by people who believed they were standing at the dawn of a brighter world. And much like a tartan-clad William Wallace charging into battle centuries before tartans were ever worn, or a Roman general fighting barbarians alongside a breed of dog that would not exist for another 1800 years, the medieval age is an idea projected backwards, shaping how we see history rather than reflecting how it was actually lived. The culprits behind this invention were Renaissance scholars, particularly an Italian poet and intellectual giant of the 14th century named Petrarch, a man who wandered Europe, salvaging crumbling Latin manuscripts, resurrecting the voices of Greece and Rome, and in doing so, convinced himself that everything between antiquity and his own lifetime had been a long, embarrassing intellectual sleep. To Petrarch and those who followed him, the ancient world had been rational, elegant, and enlightened. Their own age, by comparison, felt like an awakening, and what lay between was dismissed as a gloomy middle period, an age of decay, ignorance, and lost brilliance. In his writing, Petrarch spoke of living amid darkness and confusion while dreaming of a future radiant with rediscovered wisdom. And this language was intoxicating because it allowed Renaissance thinkers to cast themselves as heroes emerging from the shadows, modern, progressive, and intellectually superior to their medieval predecessors. It was, in essence, the original virtue signaling, and it worked spectacularly well. Over time, this attitude solidified into the famous three-age model of history. First, antiquity, the world of Greece and Rome, then the medieval age, 1,000 years of supposed stagnation, beginning with the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century, and finally the modern age, an era of reason and progress, stretching from the Renaissance to the present day. Yet this neat structure hides messy realities, because while Rome collapsed in the West, it survived in the East as the Byzantine Empire for another 1,000 years, preserving Roman law, administration, and learning. And while cities in Western Europe shrank and depopulated, the Islamic world to the south and east flourished, translating ancient texts into Arabic, advancing medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy, while Europe lagged behind, meaning that the idea of a universal dark age simply does not hold up under scrutiny. Baghdad, founded in the 8th century, became one of the largest and most intellectually vibrant cities on earth, while scholars in Damascus, Cordoba, and Cairo built upon Greek knowledge rather than forgetting it, making the Renaissance notion of rediscovery a distinctly European experience rather than a global one. Even within Europe itself, a medieval age was not a single unchanging block of time, but a dynamic and evolving period, divided by historians into the early Middle Ages of fragmented kingdoms and migrations, the High Middle Ages of population growth, cathedral building, universities, and expanding trade, and the Late Middle Ages, marked by crisis, plague, war, and transformation, each phase dramatically different from the last. And crucially, no one living between the 5th and 15th centuries ever described themselves as medieval. A peasant would have marked time by seasons and saints' days, while an educated cleric might have explained history through biblical ages of the world rather than secular periodization, making our modern obsession with the term all the more peculiar. Geography further complicates matters, because while the medieval age fits reasonably well when applied to Christian Europe, it becomes increasingly awkward when stretched across the Islamic world, Asia, Africa, or the Americas, societies that developed along entirely different intellectual and cultural trajectories and did not measure progress by the preservation or loss of Greek and Roman texts. Yet despite all this, the medieval label endured, passed down through Protestant reformers eager to criticize Catholic tradition, Enlightenment thinkers keen to mock superstitions, and modern commentators happy to contrast their own supposed rationality with a caricatured past of mud, blood, and blind faith. The medieval age became a convenient foil, a historical punching bag that allowed later generations to congratulate themselves on how far they had come, even when reality was far more complex and often far less flattering. In truth, the medieval world produced extraordinary achievements, legal systems, architectural marvels, philosophical debates, technological innovations, and rich cultural traditions, alongside its undeniable violence, inequality, and brutality. And reducing it to darkness alone says more about those doing the labeling than those being labeled. Today, historians still use these categories not because they are perfect, but because they are useful, much like calling a tomato a vegetable in the kitchen, despite knowing it is technically a fruit. And so the medieval age remains defined, somewhat loosely, as the period from the fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century to around the year 1500, centered primarily on Europe and parts of the Middle East, an invented age that nevertheless helps us navigate the vast, complicated landscape of the past. And perhaps that is the greatest irony of all. An anachronism born from Renaissance ego has become an indispensable tool for understanding history, a reminder that how we divide time often tells us more about ourselves than about the people we are studying. Because history is not a fixed story waiting to be discovered, but a conversation across centuries, shaped by memory, power, and perspective. And the medieval age, for all its misconceptions, remains one of the most fascinating chapters in that ongoing dialogue.